Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of SuperCoach, mates. Well, I think everyone's most hated time of the year has finally arrived, being the 4 or 5 week bye period. So I guess now coming out of the next 4 or 5 week blocks, you'd probably ideally want to have a full premium side. But just before we commence formalities, we'd just like to pass our condolences to Neil Danaher and his family on his passing on Monday. So we're recording on the Wednesday. I don't know about you, Thomas, but being a Collingwood supporter, I've seen sort of a bit more firsthand, his fight and his what he's done for that King's birthday game, which was sort of fading out. He's really revamped it, and it's now a blockbuster on the calendar, which it sort of never used to be. So we'd just like to pass our condolences along to Neil and his family. But now back to formality. So Thomas, how did you go on the weekend?
I think it was a double whammy, unfortunately for me. Nathan was telling me off friendly reminder that he's beaten me this week. So, yeah, by almost 200 points. I had a stinker. Been a tough season, starting down at 50,000 and trying to whittle my way up into the top 10, and then got there last week and then got shot down a couple thousand spots a game with a 2160 or 2165. So, yeah, definitely frustrating season, that's for sure. But didn't help that St Kilda did a similar situation where we worked hard to stay with Freo, and then Freo were too good in the end. But yeah, definitely a frustrating week, and hopefully we can bounce back. Obviously, it's the start of the buys this round, so it'll be interesting to see how teams are shaped up for the upcoming kind of 4 to 5 week patch of buys.
Yeah, so I guess as per normal, what we're gonna do is Thomas is gonna bring up his side and the community side, and if time allows, I might share my screen as well, so you can see how my team's coming along. But without further ado, I'm gonna hand over to Thomas, who's gonna do the discussion.
So tough week on the track for my own team. Definitely frustrating, as I said, 2165. But on the flip side, the community side is bounced back nicely back into the 2K mark or just under. But the SCMates side's probably got a few heavy hitters in there that my side hasn't quite had with the injury fronts that we've had this season. I think particularly with if you owned English from the start, that's been a really frustrating own and underperforming premiums, I guess. I know the SCMates community side didn't actually have what's his face English to start with, so that was obviously very helpful. But hopefully both sides can get through the buys unscathed. But moving on to let me just flip the screen. Moving on, not that one. The defenders. Very similar defensive line. It turns out, I think, towards the end. Both teams brought in Wilkie this week, and Wilkie, it was a tough watch as a St Kilda supporter watching Wilkie getting manhandled against Voss and basically got no freeze against him. 86 wasn't too bad considering Voss tagged Wilkie pretty much the entire game and would not let him go out of his reach within kind of 30 centimetres. And I think it's probably an important point to make that if you own a good defender, like a key defender or intercepting defender, like a Wilkie and Voss did that against Sicily a couple of weeks ago as well, just to watch on that score. But 86 was pretty good. I think that the positive with Wilkie is he spends 100% time on ground, barely goes to the bench at all, if any, and gets a lot of the kind of free kicks out of defence or the kick-outs or the out in the full. So he gets enough points, I think, that his floor is really good. Having JSOS there has helped him a lot, I think, trying to get those points. It'll be interesting to see now that, obviously, if you weren't aware, Dougal Howard's out with a calf for 3 weeks. So I don't know how that's going to impact Wilkie's role in particular and how that impacts his scoring. I don't think it does so much. It could actually help him because I know when Howard was away injured previously, Wilkie's scoring didn't drop, and I think he just gets more of the ball down there. I don't think his role changes per se. He still plays as a one-on-one defender anyway. But just to watch on that and see how that transpires. I guess the most frustrating thing for owners for Lockie Whitfield is a very, very late out on the weekend. That doesn't help at all. He doesn't look like returning probably until GWS's bye, which is about 3 weeks. So, look, you probably have some merit in trading him if you wanted to, but I only brought him just in both sides. So, yeah, probably just keep him, and hopefully Bodie Ryan can kind of hold his spot for a little bit longer. But yeah, best 18 probably helps that a little bit. That's for sure. Sinclair, no problems. Archie Roberts has actually been a really frustrating own since getting him. Eston goes sack their coach, so who knows what happens with Roberts next week. But he's probably had 2 scores where it should have been probably a ton, but yeah, had enough disposals to get there. But yeah, just super frustrating. I've VC'd in both sides, and yeah, it was super frustrating to not get 100. It was probably made more sense in my own side to probably VC Grundy instead of Roberts, considering Roberts didn't even hit nowhere near a 140, but that was kind of to be expected against Richmond. It was just disappointing he didn't reach it. Dan Houston needs to go in talking off air. He definitely hasn't reached the heights as what we've expected. Yes, he had that deviation in him a little bit at Port Adelaide where probably wasn't always scoring a 120, but a 46 is a real problem area for him. He gets his stinkers, and it was on the G as well, where traditionally he's done really well. I think there's huge red flags with how Collingwood decide to play Houston and how much they kind of share the ball down back. And yeah, Josh Dacos is in a similar mold, probably not as bad as Houston with regards to his floor. So I think out of the two, you probably get rid of Houston first anyway. And Jordan Clark to round out those defenders. He's been, really, really frustrating. I do not trade him in, I don't think. I think the way Freo have played now maybe hasn't suited Clark as much. It used to be Ryan and Clark chewing up everything down halfback, but they seem to be utilising the likes of Wagner, Warner, all those guys down back a lot more, and that's probably helped Freo's rebound. They're not so reliant on just a Jordan Clark or a Luke Ryan. They're kind of sharing the load down back. So yeah, Clark's one that I think if you have him, you probably would have other issues to deal with this week. But if that's your biggest worry, you're probably doing pretty well. How did your defensive line stack up? Did you have any of Whitfield or Clark or Houston in your side?
No, so I actually don't have Whitfield, so I was kind of glad when I saw he was a laid out. To be honest with you, so my defense actually outside of Houston actually wasn't. It was a bit of a mixed bag. So Sinclair just keeps racking up these 110 scores. I think not having the sire there has helped him. Tom McCarthy, so we're just chatting off air about him. So after a bit of a slow start, 3 of his last 4 weeks have been over 100. So I think he might be finally starting to find his feet in that West Coast midfield. Obviously, I heard last night on the radio that if you take out the Sydney game and the St Kilda game and basically the second half of the Gold Coast game, they've actually been quite competitive in all their other games. So I'm definitely going to stick with him. Houston, so I think this is one that I think my Collingwood heart will have to say to move him on, even though I have already used my 3 trades this week. So Josh Lindsay, I'm not too concerned about him. Had a bit of a down week. I've somehow still got Jacob Farrow. I don't know why, but I do. So he got a 91, which I was happy with. Luke Parker, so that was my trade in last week. So I think I spoke on air about what I was going to do up in the back line. So I did end up going with Luke Parker. And he scored not great, but North Melbourne won, so I don't think they'd be too bothered by that. And then I also had Jai Sarong, who just keeps going from strength to strength. I think he's really settled in that Sydney side, so I can't see him, moving on. And then, unfortunately, Bodie Ryan didn't get named tomorrow night, so that's a bit of a bummer because I was hoping that he would get named, but he has been dropped. And then I also had Sam Grill, who I have finally moved on this week. So I've taken advantage of the DPP additions, and I've now got Max Holmes at D1. So I'm hoping that Max can run Carlton rugged on Friday night, and he can really help that backline. So yeah, I now have, well, if you count Houston, I would now say I've got five finished defenders, but as I said, I think Houston is an entirely different discussion. So just for the purposes of that, I think I've probably got 4, and Houston is probably going to get moved on for someone who I think will be a finisher. So yeah, my defense actually isn't too bad, which I'm quite happy with.
Yeah, definitely a solid defense. I completely forgot the teams that have dropped for tomorrow night's game. So we'll touch base on that as the night goes on. So just moving on to the midfield now. Yeah, midfield was interesting. Probably the best performances was across the midfield. Butters, yeah, obviously was a poor game for Port against the Blues, but he keeps powering on with his hundreds. Really safe VC and C option, I think. I think a lot of players had Butters as a fallback C, and I guess you probably can't complain with the amount of carnage you probably had in the last couple of weeks. Bontempelli, look, he probably is in a fair bit of discomfort week to week with this knee issue, but yeah, seems to just keep powering on. He's a viable option against Fuel Mob. Nathan as a VCC option this weekend. Lockie Neal, I was in Sydney on the weekend and didn't actually realise the Giants game and Lions game was the early Sunday game. And then thought, oh shit, I've completely missed it. And Neal comes up with the top score 114 when they obviously got battered by 82 points. Neal, yeah, it's probably, as I said, he's had his best season to date, I think, in a while. And I think he's a good addition to any side. If you want an option as a midfielder, I think he's probably going to end up in that top 8 to 10 range. Just he's not that kind of complete trade. Not that complete tag target anymore. You're probably looking at McCluggage and Ashcroft ahead of him. It seems a lot of teams are targeting those two ahead of Neal. So, yeah, can't complain with Neal's performance. Dacos was really good against West Coast. He's actually one price of that 515 that I'd probably highly recommend if you don't own because, yeah, I guess if you've anti-potted him and gone against him, it's not the worst thing in the world so far, but it'd be one to you want to have towards the back end of the season. Sammy Walsh, yeah, he's a tough own at the moment, all the way down at 470k. I guess he's only had that one poor score of 79. The rest have been average for him. There's obviously way better options that he could have started with. You know, Clayton Oliver looks like a top 8 to 10 mid at the moment, and it was around Walsh's price as well. But yeah, Walsh, as I said, with these new coaches coming through, or the sackings more like of Voss and now Scott, but it'd be interesting to see how Walsh kind of goes across the next couple of weeks. Cripps bounced back really well in the last kind of fortnight or so under Fraser. So, yeah, hopefully Walsh can maintain his hundreds. Murdoch bounced back really well against the Pies. He's one you can hold for a bit longer. And for my own side, yeah, Carroll and Rechko. Rechko looks a real good pick. I'd almost be happy to have him on field most weeks at this point in time. He's a really hardworking winger who goes back defensively really well and, yeah, performed superbly against Essendon, and 107 was well deserving. And Jack Carroll, I think, is close to the end there. He's one that kind of beats up on worse opposition, and when it comes tough, he doesn't score too well. And just looking at the SCMates community side, you're probably looking at Holmes now back as a defensive option. I posted on Twitter today some trading options for this week, and they all involve Holmes pivoting to the back line. I think he'd be crazy. Yeah, he's not to have him. I think, as Nathan rightly pointed out in the defensive talks, he was, pretty much D1 there, locked in. Heaney's been a little bit underwhelming for the last fortnight, but I think he's not a bad trading option if you want this week. Plays Richmond, could go bananas there. Merritt, look, he's had a tough couple weeks, I guess, with how Eston's gone in general, but 126 in Dreamtime when they got beat was pretty good. And I wouldn't be surprised now that Scott's gone, maybe is a bit of new lease on life on him to try and really knuckle down and get some good performances under his belt for the back end of the season. And I guess Jagger Smith as well. with the leaving of Voss, has really flourished now as kind of a full-time mid. And if you held on to him, well done in your own sides, because I think he's a keep for a little bit and has forward eligibility. So, yeah, with how dicey the forward line's going, I think Milan Murdoch and Jagger Smith, if you have them in your sides, which hopefully you haven't traded them out just yet, or one or the other, having them at F6 is not the worst in the world, because of how, as we've seen with the likes of Rochelle and Rankin in the past, Rankin's injured now, the forward line is so dicey, bar maybe 2 or 3 premiums, that you can probably afford to hold a forward F6 rookie for as long as you can, with just how well some of these F6 rookies go. But how did your midfield go, Nathan? And is there anyone kind of you're targeting? Because there's definitely a few interesting options coming off the bye, not necessarily this week. Obviously, the major talk for this week is Max Holmes, but maybe next week there's a few more good options coming off their bye.
Yeah, well, I'll just quickly touch back on. So, I did outscore Thomas. Part of the reason why I actually outscored Thomas, so I've actually still got Darcy Parish, who is actually the highest scorer for the whole weekend. So just want to give a bit of a shout out to Darcy. He's been absolutely flying. His 3-week average is 117. Which I think even the wildest person couldn't have thought that he'd, get back as well as he has. But if he can keep up this form for the rest of the season, I see no reason why he can't be a F7, F8. Midfield 7 or midfield 8 player. Just especially with that scoring power. I think you want someone like that there. Yeah, so as Thomas touched on, I've actually largely got the same midfield. So Bond, definitely hampered. Merritt, I think I actually had the vice captaincy on him, and I think I took his score, which was 126, which I was very happy with. Nick Dacos, I think if you don't have Nick Dacos, I think now is the perfect time to get him. He's dropped about 115k on his starting price. I guess the only problem is still the taggers. But I think he's good enough to work through them. I also had Butters. So I was a bit, look, Port Adelaide, they got hammered by Carlton. But I don't think the 103 was too bad in the end. I've also got Rechko, so I think he's safe as houses now. Coming after a couple of down weeks, unfortunately, this normally always happens. So I think a lot of people traded out Sam Cumming last week, and he got his highest score for the year. So his break even's now back down at 25. So I can probably keep him till he's bye. Caleb Sarong, so I've actually still got Caleb Sarong, so I was quite happy when I saw that I had the 2300. Just with that, I think Farrow was in my midfield last week, so I've already touched on him. Murdoch, so I still have Milan Murdoch. I wasn't too bothered by his game last week, but obviously being at that West Coast game, he definitely, I will support Thomas's opinion there and say that I think he's not the worst option at F6. Ideally, if you can have him as that F7, M9, rotating player, I think that'd be an ideal scenario, because I don't think he's going to get dropped from that West Coast side. So, I think it's always reliable to have them. Especially, as trades and money get tight, I think we'll start trading in these, 99k players. Just having Murdoch with his DPP eligibility, if you're short in the midfield or you're short in the forward line, you can flick him up there. And I think that was it for my side, in terms of the midfield. I had Anderson, but obviously he didn't play, and he's actually on the chopping block for me. Overall, I think my midfield did quite well. I'm kind of glad now that Max Holmes is a defender eligible. Unfortunately for those people who had him, I think he was a really good point of difference, but he's no longer obviously going to be a point of difference given he's the number one scoring defender so far this year. So, yes, it was a good pick to start with Holmes. But yeah, if you want your point of difference, you might want to look elsewhere. But otherwise, I think most people, when we discuss sort of our trade options, I think most people are probably set on at least one pure mid, and probably there's a second one at your Saints Thomas, who I think a lot of people are going to jump on this week as a mid forward DPP eligible player. So yeah, as I said, despite missing Sarong, my midfield still did quite well, so I was quite pleased.
Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah, it's definitely positive when you mid-fides, and I guess that's what's kind of how differentiate a lot of sides having those high-performing mids, and that's why, if you really want to push high in SuperCoach, you want to get those high-performing mids in your side as quick as possible, and that's what Nathan's managed to secure to some degree. But moving on to the rucks, the rucks was the most frustrating one because I guess Jackson keeps on performing really, really well, and he's one that if you want to go that three-pronged attack in your flex, Jackson might be the one alongside Grundy and Gawn and even Sherry there as well. But they're realistically going to be kind of who we talk about for the remainder of the season. There's probably no two ways about it. There's no other rucks really competing for that spot. I know Darcy Cameron was a cheap option at flex, which still could be the play. I believe Collingwood got a ruck as their mid-season
Yes,
draft.
we did.
Sorry. So I don't know if he comes in sooner rather than later to play what Steen does, and then maybe Darcy Cameron doesn't become viable option anymore. But yeah, maybe keep an eye on that because he scored about 133, albeit against West Coast, but could be a good cheap flex option. But yeah, I guess it's the same for you, Nathan, with how these rucks are going all season. I think just as long as they're firing, don't worry about them.
Yeah, no, unless they get injured, I think they're just lock and load. I think after my thing with the conning last week, I think just quickly, so I don't have the conning anymore. So I think he got brought back to reality last week. Gone out scoring by bets. So more than happy with that. I currently have a new player at my flex position, but I'd like to get one of these ruckmen as that flex position at the end. It's either going to be a premium ruck or a premium mid that I would ideally like to have in that flex position. I think the rucks are probably more likely because I think the way that flex position works, if one of them goes gangbusters, in the rucks, I think they're a lot more prone to having those, really high scores, like Grundy did a couple of weeks ago with his 200. So I think you want a ruckman or a high impact midfielder in that spot, because you might be scratching around and you might have a player like even like a Rishali or a Rankin who can just come out with a 150, and it can really, tip you over the edge in a tight final. So, I think the more the season goes on, I think the more likely it is that I'm probably going to go down the players who are capable of, having a really high score, but they also have a bit of a, relatively good baseline. So, yeah, I think, I think I still got McAndrew there at R3. Ideally next week, if I can do it, I'd like to turn McAndrew into either Grundy or Cherry, or I'll give Darcy Cameron one more go. But yeah, I think if I can turn him into one of those Cherry or Grundy, I think I'll definitely have a look at that. Although I have just looked now, Cherry's break even's 179. So Yeah, I don't know what I'm going to do there with that regard. I think the one I'd like's Grundy. So, yeah, we'll just have to wait and see with that. But, yeah, no, rucks are much better now. I've got Gorn in there instead of DeConning. And, yeah, now we're just enjoying, the 250 odd we're getting from the ruckman each week, which is fantastic.
Yeah, that's exactly what you want. But moving on to the forward line to wrap up this episode before we go into trades and vice captains and captaincies. Forward line, yeah. As I said, or prefaced earlier, when I was talking about the midfielders, forwards are just as dicey as they come. Flanders genuinely looks probably now like a top six forward in the role that he's playing at St Kilda now. He's kind of been pushed out of that centre bounce rotation as much and starting off the half back line and pushing into the mids, which probably suits him a lot better because he's at this point in time anyway, just because his disposal efficiency was pretty messy at centre stoppage, and it's a lot cleaner coming off the ball, off the back line, pushing into the mids, that's for sure. And I think that's kind of replicated in his scoring. Shees or Petrarca, they're going to score you that score most weeks. I think, yeah, you don't get rid of them unless they get injured or suspended for a while. Cozzy Pickett bounced back nicely. He had probably a couple down games. He's one that I think, like probably all forwards, you try and buy at their low point and then kind of keep them for the rest of the season. Yeah, I guess the most frustrating thing for me was Richelli. 41 was a disaster class with him. I think that's half the reason why I scored so poorly. Rankin was on for another 120 plus and then busted his calf and is out indefinitely at this point, which is not great for Crows supporters. I'll touch base with you, Nathan, in a minute about what could you do with Rankin because I think he's a definite trade now at this point in time, just with the Crows having their bye. Brandon Cook's done his job, I think, very, very nicely for us, much better than what we expected. He's definitely trading out for me for Ison or Banfield. This week, Philippou, another really, really strong score from him in a tough Freo game. He was looking, I think, as I've mentioned before on this podcast, Philippou has this habit of scoring bananas in patches. I think Al Payton from SuperCoach posts on Twitter on the game night that he scored about 56 points in the second quarter, which is what he's very capable of doing, but don't expect him to probably have that consistent 4-quarter effort at the moment. And I guess that's really helpful for kind of SuperCoach to understand how he kind of scores. I reckon he scores in bursts compared to that consistent, 30 points a quarter, better 120. But he's kind of one that if you still have him, which hopefully most people do, he's kind of safe to have. He'll have his moments, but I think St Kilda want to get as many games in as possible, considering he's had a very interrupted, couple seasons at St Kilda with not having a full crack at it. Murphy Reid tore us a new one in the last quarter. He's a really talented footballer and someone that I think started with at the SCMates community squad, just with how I love him as a footballer. So, yeah, 126 probably was the first time he's really deserved that score. He's been hovering around that 85, 95 mark for pretty much the whole season and really getting a good score to kickstart that forward line for the weekend was really nice to see in the community side. And then Lockie McAndrew, I think there's maybe merit in holding him if you're desperate, but I think with the money he's made, he's much exceeded our expectations with what we expected, I guess, in McAndrew at the start of the season with how was he going to go when he was a replacement for Rob, but he's been a really good ruck for us. And I think it definitely showed on Friday night against the Hawks that whenever they played Thursday night, he did start to cramp up a little bit towards the end and had to get on the bench because he was really struggling. So I think the rest will do him wonders, but I think it's also probably time for him to move on. And it's a very easy swap to someone like Holmes where you probably must have to have him in that D1 position. But I guess flipping over to you, Nathan, I think the biggest question is what do you do with Rankin? Because he's out for probably a while. And what options do you have? Both, I guess, DPP options and maybe specifically forward line options if you look in that route.
Well, I think if you're in the top, if you're playing for rank, you just have to move him on. Pardon the pun. But yeah, I think you just have to move on Rankin, unfortunately. I don't like it when you get told there's no timeline on his return. That's always a red flag for me. So, I think unfortunately this is just a bit of a problem because I doubt many people would have started him considering he was suspended in round one for his stuff with the Collingwood player in round 23 last year. So I doubt he's going to be someone who you started with. I think this is unfortunately just one of those things where you've just got to cut your losses and sort of move on. So if you somehow don't have Sheasel or Petrarca, I definitely think they are probably going to be your top two targets. If you don't have either one of those two, you probably should by now. The other one I don't mind actually, flying a bit under the radar, but Jack Ross down at Richmond. He's only in 3% of sides. He's averaging 99 for the year, which is currently fourth among fourth among forwards, and overall he's third. So he's putting together quite a good season. If you want to go down a bit of a point of difference, you are going to need about 15k for it. But I actually don't mind that Jack Ross option. Josh Tracy, I don't like key forwards, but I think out of all of them, I think he's the one that's shown he's sort of a more reliable option, although there is always the danger with the key forwards. Otherwise, you're probably stuck with you're probably stuck with a lot of these Rankin-like players in Bolton and Pickett who can really score quite well, but then they can put an absolute stinker in. So if you want to go down the same path, they're probably both good options. I'd probably go with Pickett and save the 20k. Again, if you want to go cheaper than that, I think Jason Horne-Francis, if you're happy to ride that roller coaster with him, I think he's quite a good option. Murphy Reed's there. The other one actually who has actually hit a bit of form, is Jordan De Goey at Collingwood. So his 3-round average is about 110. He's 440 odd K. I'll just get him up now. So he's 441,000. He's in 7% of sides. I'm one of them that's got him, so I've really enjoyed his past, month or so. If you want a point of difference, perhaps him and Jack Ross are the way to go. And I think the guy would definitely fit that, that flex role where you probably can't justify picking him as a midfielder. But as a flex play, if he comes out and he scores a 160 odd and he just rips the game apart, if you've got him in that flex position, well, you're going to get his score anyway. Otherwise, unfortunately with the forward line, it's basically there's really only Sheasel and Petrarca who I would say are reliable. And then it's probably a bit of a drop to anyone else. So as I said, my options for ranking, if you haven't got one of Petrarca or Sheasel yet, you definitely have to get one of those two. And then if you want a point of difference, I'd probably go with Jack Ross. If you want a like-for-like replacement, it's probably Pickett or Bolton. I would probably be more inclined to go with Pickett and save the 20k. Otherwise, I think you're going to have this roller coaster ride with all the other forwards. So, I think, unless you go the safe option of one of those two, I think you're basically in the same spot with whoever else you pick. So, I can see merit in keeping him, but I think just with that uncertain time frame, I think it's probably just easier to cut your losses and move on as opposed to, checking the news week to week to see if he's playing.
Yeah, No, I definitely agree on that front there, Nath. And yeah, I guess if you have the option of DPPing, that's also a very good shout. There as well, particularly with the likes of Holmes and a few good midfielders available as well, as we've touched on prior. But before we wrap it up, we'll look at vice captains and captains. And I guess for my trades this week, I think Ison and Banfield are very, very locked in, or should be locked into everyone's sides. Scored both very well. Ison looks a real good player, playing that high half forward role and pushing up the ground for his disposals as well. And Banfield looks like he's growing strength to strength in that wing role, pushing both defensively and offensively as well, and is a big bodied as well. So doesn't get roared off very well against other opposition midfielders as well, which is really good to see. And I think he's going to score nicely moving forward. For me, Maxi Holmes comes in straight away. I think going to be in both sides. Oh, sorry, I've got him in my community mates team. So probably looking at, depending on how the votes go across the next day or so for our Twitter poll, probably look like Bailey Smith. I did put Arch Richards there as well from the Dogs, who's found a bit of form as well. And Riley Sanders, I don't know if you mentioned him, Nath. He's one I think that could well be in that Jack Ross category, who has looked really, really positive for the Dogs and has finally found kind of his time in the midfield. That's for sure. I think with the likes of Libby going down injured early in the season, he's one that's really stepped up for the Doggies, that's for sure. But looking at the VC and C option, sorry, I'll post something up tomorrow with regards to the SCMates team. But yeah, secured a Hawthorn. Look, I guess if you're desperate for a Thursday night VCC option, I'd probably suggest Sinclair is the only person there. Cats and the Blues, Maxi Holmes Friday night. I could see maybe some attention going to Smith, if anything. But Smith and Holmes, take your pick, really. But Holmes, I think, is a really good option there. Sydney, Richmond, I think that's where all the money is for your VC and C options, because both Grundy and Heaney could go gangbusters as well. Could get really ceiling scores. I definitely have VC on Grundy for that one if you do own him. Brisbane, Freo, probably wouldn't touch any players there. The only other option there, Western Bulldogs, Collingwood, if you wanted to go. Bailey Dale, I know. If you do have him, I could see him going quite big, considering Collingwood leak a lot of points to halfback, similar to what St Kilda do. Dogs as well. You want Bontempelli. Obviously, Dacos could have a good game in that game because the Dogs don't really tag. And then if you're really desperate for a captaincy option on Sunday evening, West Coast Essendon, I guess the only red flag to that is how Essendon going to line up with a new coach or Dean Solomon taking interim. Probably a Merritt or Roberts as well is probably a safe option there. But what are your quick thoughts before we wrap it up with regards to vice captaincy and captaincy options, Nath?
Yeah, I think for me this is easy. So unfortunately I don't have Grundy. Otherwise I would definitely be chucking probably the vice captain on him. So I think if you have Grundy, I think that's just a lay down Mazet, just put it on him, and there's no real ruckman at Richmond at the minute because Nank's injured. So I think just put it on Grundy. I personally, so I've joined the Max Holmes bandwagon this week. He's straight into my side and he's got the vice captaincy on him straight away. And I'm looking to that Saturday night game, so the Dogs and Collingwood. So both of these sides don't really tag. So it's just going to be a question of which side can get on top. I just feel like with the Collingwood injuries, I feel like the Dogs probably have a better side right now than Collingwood. So, I think Bond or Dacos are probably going to be my options that I've tossed between. I think if Collingwood are going to win, I think Nick Dacos is going to have a blinder. I'd be very surprised if Collingwood won and he didn't score, over 120. Just given the fact that he's probably not going to get tagged. Bond, I think, is probably the safer option, but then there's the injury that he's currently carrying. And then the Sunday games. I think the only ones really there are Merritt, or Roberts, or my mate Darcy Parish. I don't think I would be brave enough to put the captaincy on him. But he's been very impressive. So, and then obviously there's always Max Gorn as well. Who's a reliable captain. But I think for me this week it'll be Holmes, definitely with the vice captain, and then the captain will be probably one of Dacos or Bontempelli, I would say.
Yeah, that's for sure. I think it's probably bank it, especially in the best 18. I guess you don't want to be too nasty with your captaincy and vice captaincy picks, but there's definitely a few safe options, that's for sure, this round. But hopefully you have a good start to your first round of buys. It doesn't seem like too many people are impacted. Probably when we come to the round 16 review, there'll be a lot more affected in that real hellhole of a bye week. But other than that, hopefully survive the first week of buys, and we'll catch you for the round 12 review.